1, 2, 3, 4.
Hey everyone, this is Tommy Stewart Stazeski from the YouTube channel Tom Stewart Drums, where I do reviews and unboxing and lists and commentary, and sometimes I promote myself with various bands that I play in. The video for this week is going to be my what I would consider the essential power pop and new wave albums of all time. I was going to make it top 25, but I decided to change that because as I was going through the list, the list got so huge. It's closer to 50. I'm going to try to kind of streamline it and make it just an ultimate like buyer's guide. Feel free to put in the comments below if there's anything that you want to add to it. Put your own lists, anything like that. It's always fun to hear from other people and what their opinions are on stuff. And obviously things that I might have forgotten about. But again, this is my personal list. This is not Rolling Stones magazine definitive list of, well, thank God for that. And while we're on the subject of power pop, let me just give a plug to my buddy Ken Sharp's latest Raspberries Bible. It's called Overnight Sensation, the story of the Raspberries. And you can see it's gigantic. I mean, it's just, filled with all kinds of pictures and articles and newspaper clippings and reviews and interviews. And it's pretty amazing. So I figured while I'm doing a video on essential power pop and new wave records, I should mention this book. And you can find Ken on Facebook. I'll put below on the screen, I'll put the link to any sort of social media page that he has set up to where you can buy this book. Me and Ken go way back. We've known each other since, we first met in 1984 when he was co-hosting the Metal Shop radio show on WYSP in Philadelphia, which was every metalhead's Saturday night ritual in the Philadelphia area. And I was lucky enough to win a contest where I was able to go to a listening party for Kiss's Animalize record, which was in 1984. And I through the Metal Shop radio show, I won a ticket to go to that. And it was at I think it was Studio 4 or Sigma Sound. I think it was Studio 4 in Philly. And Ken was the guy that was sort of hosting it, meeting everybody at the door. So that was my first time meeting Ken Sharp. And Paul Stanley was there that night. He was the unannounced special guest, which was amazing. I'll just never forget my father sitting with me on the floor of the big recording room, the drum room of the studio with, I don't know, maybe 25 or 30 other people. And they blasted the Kiss Animalize record, like full volume. And we basically all just sat there for, 35, 40 minutes listening to the record from start to finish. And my dad was sitting next to me. And at the time, it didn't really click or dawn on me, but if you listen to Animalize now and some of the ultra cheesy lyrics, especially the Gene Simmons stuff, the Burn Bitch Burn stuff, and, gonna put my log in your fireplace. And I'm sitting there with my dad, and I'm thinking to myself now, like, what the fuck was my dad thinking to himself sitting there having to be forced to listen to this? I mean, he liked rock music, and he liked really loved AC/DC, he loved Judas Priest, but he was more of a Beatles Stones guy, but he loved Cheap Trick, took me to see them 3 times and took me to see, Kiss and with Judas Priest, and he actually commented about how much he liked Judas Priest. So he was not against hard, heavy music, but, you figure by the 80s it was so bad, some of it just so cheesy, and he must have been sitting there thinking to himself, Jesus Christ, this is the shit my son is listening to. But in hindsight, I mean, I still like that record. It's for a Kiss record in the 80s, it is what it is. It's not Shakespeare. But anyway, that's a side note. That was the first night that I met Ken, and we became friends through seeing each other at record expos and stuff like that in the Philly area. And he lived probably about a half hour from me outside of Philadelphia. We just started connecting on a lot. We both loved the same bands, Kiss, Cheap Trick, The Knack, the Beatles, the Raspberries. and power pop and just, all that sort of stuff. So we really kind of bonded over that and became friends. And eventually moved to Los Angeles about 15, 20 years ago, something like that. And, we just stay in touch online. But great guy, great author. All of his books are outstanding. His Kiss books are amazing. So, yeah, I would definitely recommend checking out the Raspberries book when you get a chance. I also need to mention about Ken Sharp. He's an outstanding musician who also has put out a lot of CDs of his own music. Very power pop meets like the Beach Boys, Beatle-y. Like, he's got a lot of influences going on in his music. Bubblegum, all this mixture of a lot of different things that he does, and he does really well. And he's always putting out his own music constantly. He just pumps out the records every couple of years. He's got another one coming out. And I would highly recommend checking out any of his music. It's on Spotify and probably on YouTube. And you can also connect through his Facebook page with Ken as well. He's known as, in the Kiss circles, as the Kiss author who has put out, he's done the Goldmine interviews and all kinds of stuff like that. But we don't want to forget about his musical output also. Excellent songwriter, and he's collaborated with a lot of people in the power pop world as well. So definitely check that out if you get a chance. Okay, so let's get started with the video. Now, as I mentioned, this is a list of what I consider the essential power pop new wave records of all time. Granted, there's going to be a lot of stuff that I'm not touching on, either that I'm not aware of or that I didn't really get into or listen to. You can add stuff in the comments if you like. There's probably some more modern stuff that I'm leaving out. Obviously, I can't make this a 3-hour video, so I'm kind of keeping it to like probably my top 50, somewhere right around there. Way too many to just get into crazy lists of, like, there's so much stuff out there. And there is some new stuff here and there that I like, but this is mainly, I want to say, 70s and 80s with a little bit of 90s in there. Now, there are a few things in here that I might, add to the list that, for example, Enough's Enough. Hair band, what many would consider a hair band, but they kind of straddle the line of power pop and hair metal. Very heavy power pop influence with those guys. Cheap Trick, the Beatles, Elvis Costello, a band called Off Broadway from Chicago. So they are in the power pop world. It's just their image kind of, took over how people perceive them. But we'll get more to that. We'll get more involved in them later on in the list. But there are some things in here that, some people, the purists, might not consider power pop. A band like Cheap Trick, albums like Heaven Tonight and Dream Police, many people would just consider that classic rock. And to some degree, that they're right, but they are considered hugely influential in the power pop world. So, the criteria for what is power pop, slightly crunchy guitars, Beatle-esque type of melodies, and songs about girls and cars and, fun stuff like that. The criteria for what is power pop kind of fluctuates depending on who you ask. I have my own opinions on that sort of stuff. And some people would say the Beatles are power pop, definitely the precursors to power pop, but not really sure how to characterize them. And then I think Pete Townsend had said he is the one that coined the term power pop when I think he was asked to describe the Who's music. And definitely some of the earlier Who, things like The Kids Are All Right and stuff would fall into the power pop category. But they're not what I would consider a power pop band. They're a classic rock, band. So yeah, I don't want to get into the semantics of, too much of what is considered what. New wave, same thing. Some people, new wave is just purely keyboards and stuff like The Cure and things like that, which is probably closer to alternative, 80s alternative. But to me, new wave is stuff like The Cars and like Missing Persons, and a lot of the power pop that started adding a little bit of the punk sensibilities and synthesizers, into the music. That to me kind of was the birth of new wave, really, for me anyway. So we're going to get into my rundown of what I think is the essential list of power pop new wave records. Now, this list is not in any particular order. I'm going to start off with the obvious stuff, the things that are probably considered the most influential, or the most, I guess the word is obvious stuff. And first would be Get the Knack from the Knack. Just a tremendous record. I mean, recorded live. Most of the versions on that album were done in, I think, less than, one or two takes. Well, there is no such thing as less than one take. So it's probably one take or two take, maybe three in some instances. I think there were very little, if no, overdubs on the record. They basically set up in the studio live and recorded it, banged out what was essentially the set that they were playing in the clubs since like 78 into 79. And they had a tremendous buzz behind them when people like Bruce Springsteen. They had a lot of people in LA. Ray Manzarek was one of them. Would jump up on stage with them and jam. And these guys knew that this was a shit hot band and that they were going to go somewhere. The general consensus is that they just came out of nowhere and were like an overnight sensation, and it was a manufactured record company thing, mainly because of the Beatles-inspired album cover, which probably hurt them. And what really hurt them was not talking to the press. They decided, somebody in their camp decided it was a good idea to be mysterious and not give any interviews, and it just really turned off, I think, a lot of journalists, and it became a backlash because Sharona was just such a huge song. It was everywhere. You couldn't get away from it. And this whole Nuke the Knack movement got started by somebody, and really they put out the second record, But the Little Girls Understand, and it was kind of, like a weaker version of the first record, even though there's some really great songs on that second record. But there was such a backlash against them. There really wasn't much they could do at that point. But the first record is just flawless from start to finish. I mean, Bruce Gary is like the Buddy Rich of power pop drummers, just amazing. I'm really fortunate that I got to meet him before he passed, and Doug Feiger as well. In 96 or 97, right around there, I guess, they did a little short reunion run of a few shows on the East and West Coast. And again, bringing up Ken Sharp, he got me into the Baltimore Hard Rock Cafe show, which was the original four members of the Knack, which was friggin' awesome, killer. They just killed it. And that's the one and only time I ever saw the original lineup. Ken saw them at the Tower in '79 on the first album, which is mind blowing. But the first record, the debut from '79, and Round Trip, the third record from 1981, are both essential power pop records. The third record, Round Trip, was produced by Jack Douglas, who did Cheap Trick and Aerosmith and Stars, among other things. And that is like a little bit more of a psychedelic tinged sort of album. There's a lot more adventurous stuff out of the box going on that record, yet still having the power pop thread running through the whole album. Very underrated, that's the word I was looking for. It just kind of fell out under the radar, and then the band broke up not long after that, and they've reformed a few times with different members and stuff like that, and have put out some really good quality records. Serious Fun is a really good record. Zoom is a great record. But for me, you can't go wrong with the first three, but especially the debut and Round Trip. So next would be Cheap Trick. And, with a band that has 20 albums, it's really hard to just kind of narrow down what are the essential power pop Cheap Trick records. For me, it would be any of the first four. The debut record is a little punkier and a little more avant-garde and a little strange in some of the subject matter, a little bit raw, but it's a killer record. Most of it classifies as power pop. Oh Candy is power pop. LA Kitty is power pop. Hot Love is probably power pop. There's just Taxman. There's just so much great stuff on that first record. It's my favorite Cheap Trick record, next to Dream Police. And any of the first four, the debut, In Color, Heaven Tonight, or Dream Police, just packed with amazing songs. I mean, it's their classic era, pretty flawless from start to finish. The 3 of the 4 produced by Tom Werman, and the debut produced by Jack Douglas. Just amazing records. If you're a power pop fan, you're already aware of them. You probably already own them. That's not to knock any of the later Cheap Trick records, which are also have some really scattered moments of genius throughout, their whole catalog. Next Position Please is another underappreciated power pop record. So yeah, I would check out those first 4. So many songs on those first 4 records. I mean, Dream Police, Surrender, I Want You to Want Me, of course. With the live version, it's the better version of that. Way of the World is genius. I'll Be With You Tonight is genius. Need Your Love is genius. Big Eyes, Hello There, So Good to See You, Downed, On Top of the World, On the Radio, Taking Me Back. I mean, any of those songs, you can just, if you're not fully aware of the Cheap Trick catalog, Spotify any of those songs or YouTube them and check them out, and you're not going to go wrong with any of it. The next would be the Raspberries. Now, the first 2 Raspberries records were a little bit more of a Beach Boys kind of thing. A lot of ballads and a lot of surf sort of sounding stuff. Not necessarily surf, there's moments of that. Things like On the Beach and stuff like that. But there are, like, on those first 2 records, you had Go All the Way, which is, the power pop classic of all classics. That is their signature song. But most of those first 2 records didn't fall in line with that style. You had I Can Remember, which is probably one of the greatest songs ever, especially ever by Eric Carmen. That song, is like this epic 6 or 7 minute long progressive power ballad. It's incredible. But the first 2 Raspberry records were definitely a little more lightweight. By side 3 in 1973 is really when they came into their own as far as showing more of the side of them. It was the more rocking side, more of the Small Faces and that sort of thing. You can hear the Steve Marriott influence in Eric Carmen's vocals and writing style. And songs like Ecstasy and Tonight and I'm a Rocker and all those songs on side 3 are just great essential power pop. And really side 3, and probably starting over 2, were big influences on Paul Stanley from Kiss's solo album from '78. There are elements of Raspberry songs in his songs on that record. Little, sections, pre-choruses and verses and stuff like that. Wouldn't You Like to Know Me has elements of Tonight in the verses on the Paul Stanley solo record. So you can definitely hear, and he's stated before that, that Raspberries were a huge influence on him. And then the record after that, after drummer Jim Bonfanti left and bass player Dave Smalley left, and in came Michael McBride on drums and Scott McCall on bass. And Scott was a big contributor to starting over the final Raspberries record from 1974. He wrote or co-wrote some of the songs on that album, and that is another just, heavier guitar-driven power pop Raspberries record. The title track, Starting Over, is great. Overnight Sensation hit record, classic. I Don't Know What I Want is a total Who homage. It's like Won't Get Fooled Again and Baba O'Reilly rolled into one. And there's great Rose-Colored Glasses, which I think is a Scott McCall song. Just, you can't go wrong with any of the Raspberries records, but especially if you like the heavier side. It would be side 3 from '73 and Starting Over from '74. I was lucky enough to see the Raspberries reunion at B.B. King's in New York City in 2000. What was it, 2006 or 7? I'll put it on the screen. I forget what year it was. Again, Ken Sharp hooked me up with getting into the show and actually being able to hang out afterwards and meeting the guys in the Raspberries. I'll put a photo in the screen here from that night. They had a couple of extra backing musicians and vocalists with them on stage to fill out the sound, but I'll tell you what, it was just chills all night listening and watching the original four guys playing all of these classic songs. It was just amazing. I'm just really glad that I got to experience that, along with how many thousands of other people or hundreds of thousands of other people that got to see. I don't know how many people actually got to see that tour. Probably not hundreds of thousands. They did small clubs and they didn't do that many shows, so I would say thousands. But it was an incredible experience, and really glad that I got a chance to see that. It's funny because the Raspberries did a show at this club in Margate, New Jersey called Gables in '74, which must have been starting over. And it was a nightclub that my father's bar band at the time, The Exceptions, were a house band there, basically playing there 5 nights a week. And in Ken's book, I noticed there was tour dates, and it said that they played, Raspberries played the Gables in '74. And I used to go to that club to see my father's band play when I was a kid. I was probably in there a few times in '74 and '75, but I remember being in there a little bit older, around '77, when I was about 7 or 8 years old. And it's just kind of crazy thinking about that Raspberries played that same venue that my dad played all the time. Same thing with Cheap Trick. They used to do shows in the Philly area, in the South Jersey area in like '74. And it was Club Aljo's, I think, or maybe it was the Zodiac. And they were two places that The Exceptions, my father's band, played all the time too. So it's kind of weird thinking that, my dad's band's playing there, and then the next night this unknown band from Illinois called Cheap Trick was playing the next night after my dad, and who knew that those guys were going to turn into what they eventually turned into. It's kind of a small world. Interesting little side tidbit there. All right, so moving along. Next would be Elvis Costello and the Attractions. And my essential records from Costello would be, really any of the first like 4 or 5 that Nick Lowe did. Even though Costello's debut, My Aim Is True, is excellent too. But it was kind of a different band. It wasn't like it wasn't the Attractions. He had some members of Huey Lewis's band Clover, I think, playing on that record. And there's great stuff on that record too. But to me, it really fell together with This Year's Model in '78. It just gelled. The Attractions, one of the best bands on the planet at the time. Just amazing players. Pete Thomas, one of my favorite drummers as far as an influence on me. The run of albums from This Year's Model, Armed Forces in '79, and then he did Get Happy, which didn't have as much standout material on it as the 2 previous. And then he came back with Trust at the very end of 1980, which I think is the last record Nick Lowe produced for him. And that is an amazing record, too. I mean, it has the duet with Glenn Tilbrook, Whisper to a Scream, and it has Clubland, and there's just great songs on Trust. It's probably the last truly great Costello record for me that I really enjoyed. For me, This Year's Model from '78 and Armed Forces from '79 are the 2 essentials. Elvis Costello and the Attractions records. Now, key tracks on both of those would be Pump It Up, This Year's Girl, No Action, I Don't Want to Go to Chelsea, and on Armed Forces, you had Accidents Will Happen, Oliver's Army, Goon Squad, Moods for Moderns, What's So Funny About Peace, Love, and Understanding, and Senior Service, both records produced by Nick Lowe, who was a genius in the studio. So yeah, if you're looking for key tracks to look up on YouTube or Spotify, I would start with those. Next, we're going to go to, speaking of Nick Lowe and his solo output. Nick Lowe did Nick Lowe put out his own records in the late '70s into the early '80s, but he used Rockpile as his backing band. Dave Edmunds, Billy Bremer, and Terry Williams on drums. And Rockpile was the backing band for a lot of Dave Edmunds' solo records in the '70s as well, up into the probably '81 or '82. Again, like the Attractions, just phenomenal band. The Knack, the Attractions, Graham Parker and the Rumor, like there were these band, Joe Jackson's band. This era from like '77 to like '80, '81 just had killer musicians, killer chops, and they were playing simple music, but they just did it so well. It was just so kick-ass. Terry Williams from Rockpile, one of my all-time favorite drummers for this style of music. He's like the shuffle king, just like a machine, just killer stuff. He went on to be in Dire Straits for a little while after Rockpile. But anyway, on Nicolo's solo records, his first one was called Jesus of Cool, and in the USA it was called Pure Pop for Now People. It's pretty much the same record except for a couple of tracks. And that came out in 78. And key tracks on that album are I Love the Sound of Breaking Glass, They Called It Rock, Heart of the City, and So It Goes. If you're a power pop person, you've heard of probably all those songs. And also the follow-up album, Labor of Lust, from 79, which the key tracks on that for me were Switchboard Susan, Cruel to Be Kind, Cracking Up, Born Fighter, Big Kick, Plain Scrap. Say that 3 times fast. And Rockpile's the backing band on both of those albums, and they're just tight, well-produced, basically rock and roll records, but, with the power pop, new wave sort of sheen and attitude towards them. You won't go wrong with any of those records. Okay, moving along, we've got The Cars, and for me, The Cars' essential records are the first two, the debut from 78 and Candy-O from 79. The debut record, every single song on that album has been played on the radio. It's like the first Boston record. It's just one classic after another. There's literally, you drop the needle anywhere on that record, and you're going to hear a song that you've heard. And there's a reason for that. It's amazing. Produced by Roy Thomas Baker, along with Candy-O, who was Queen's producer, produced Cheap Trick later on. And you can hear the Cars using the Queen background vocal harmony, the stacked harmony vocals, which in turn Queen took from the Sweet. So it kind of, it's a 6 degrees of the Sweet sort of thing. But Roy Thomas Baker's production on both of those records, just, very futuristic sounding for 78, polished, but yet, ballsy, heavy, not heavy, but, prominent guitars, synths, just a perfect blend of synthesizer and guitar and hooks and punchy drums with, kind of like the new wave sort of production values attached to it. The debut, like Best Friend's Girl, Moving in Stereo, Bye Bye Love, You're All I've Got Tonight, on and on, every song. And Candy-O, almost as solid as the debut. Not quite, but still it had Candy-O, the title track, classic, killer song. Dangerous Type, Let's Go, It's All I Can Do, Night Spots. So that was a really good, solid follow-up record. Unfortunately, the album after that, Panorama, pretty much shit the bed. There was no real singles off of that record. So Panorama was a real disappointment for the band. No hits on it. I'm trying to think of the single that was on that. Touch and Go. It was an okay song, not bad. But a little weird. Odd time signatures, it wasn't really very radio friendly for the masses. I think, stuff like that probably tends to go over a lot of people's heads if it's not an immediate thing, Yeah, after 2 really strong records and then Panorama shit the bed, basically. And then they came back with Shake It Up, which is a really good, pretty good solid Cars record. There's a lot of good stuff on there. There's some, some stuff that's throw away, but way better than Panorama. Shake It Up should have been the follow-up to Candy-O, actually. They probably wouldn't have lost much steam if that's the case. And then they got Mutt Lang and blew up with Heartbeat City, with You Might Think and all that stuff, and Drive. That's not my favorite. It's a very commercialized version of the Cars. Not saying they're bad songs. Obviously they're huge hits and they're well-crafted songs. But to me, the Cars is the edgier new wave 70s Cars, 78, 79. That's my personal preference. Anyway, next would be Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. First 3 records. The debut from 76. The follow-up, You're Gonna Get It, from 78. And Damn the Torpedoes from 79. very Midwestern, jangle pop sort of, Birds influence. They're power pop records, with a slight sort of classic rock overtone, I guess you would say. Stuff like Breakdown's not really power pop, but it's, you have American Girl, which is, quintessential. I had to think for a minute. Power pop songs. Cover bands beat the shit out of it. Everybody's tired of it, but it goes over. So you can play it. But you had on those first three records, you had Breakdown, you had American Girl, Fooled Again, I Don't Like It, Strangers in the Night, Rockin' Around With You. You had on the second record, you had When the Time Comes, I Need to Know, another great power pop song. Listen to Her Heart, another great power pop song. And then on Damn the Torpedoes, the huge record, you had Refugee, Even the Losers, Here Comes My Girl, Don't Do Me Like That, Shadow of a Doubt. I mean, just great freaking songs, just top-notch, top-shelf stuff across the board. And Hard Promises had good stuff on it too, but I feel like these first three records were really the quintessential Tom Petty records. And that ties into the next band, which is 2020, which was a band that had, I would say, sort of 6 degrees of separation between Tom Petty and like Dwight Twilley, the Dwight Twilley Band, which is another. I don't have it in my immediate list right here, but the Dwight Twilley records, both of those records, great power pop records as well. Those are like a sidebar mention. I kind of forgot about them, but now that I'm talking about Petty in 2020, I'm remembering that the Dwight Twilley records with Phil Seymour, great stuff. And so Phil Seymour played the drums on 2020's debut record. Not every song, but he played on a few of the songs. He helped out in the studio. And then you had Dwight Twilley doing TV appearances for those first two records. I think maybe it was the second record. And you had Tom Petty doing some of the TV appearances with him as the bass player in the band because he was friends with them. So there's kind of like this tie-in, around, Petty was from Jacksonville, Florida, and I think the guys from 2020 and Dwight Twilley were Oklahoma guys. So there was all this, cross-contamination sort of thing going on with all of those guys, and a lot of their music tends to sound influenced by the same sort of stuff. You can tell they all listen to a lot of the same records, but the 2020 debut album, and the follow-up is good too, look out, but the debut is a classic. I mean, came out in 79, produced by Earl Mankey, who was in the band The Sparks. Not The Sparks, it was just called Sparks. His production work was really cool and edgy. Anything that he worked on had real punchy drums and just a real good like new wave sort of sound to it. Great producer. Songs on this record that are essential for me would be Oh Sherry, Remember the Lightning, which kind of sounds like American Girl a little bit. It's kind of like almost like a rewrite. It's very similar. Both great songs, but Remember the Lightning is probably the one you'd be less sick of hearing, so I would recommend checking that out. Yellow Pills, power pop classic, so much so that they named the whole power pop series of compilation CDs after that song. Jet Lag is great. Out of This Time is great. Just punchy power pop with like some synth flourishes and stuff like that. Really good records. I mean, if you like any of that sort of 70s new wave meets power pop sound, you gotta get the debut 2020 record. It's just the self-titled debut. It came out in 79. Moving along, we have the Romantics from Detroit Rock City. Debut record, 79. Classic, start to finish. I mean, What I Like About You, of course, the huge song. When I Look in Your Eyes, killer power pop song. Hung on You, another great power pop song. Keep in Touch. They did a cover of the Kinks' She's Got Everything. Just jangly Rickenbacker, 50s rock and roll sort of influence with like Beatles. Obvious, Beatles thread runs through all this stuff. That's a given. Sort of, rockabilly-esque, not totally, but hard to really kind of pin down. Just a very, you could tell they were into like Dwayne Eddy and like, just the 50s rock and roll sort of thing. And they incorporated that into somehow like a 80s, late 70s, early 80s power pop, new wave kind of thing. So yeah, the debut from the Romantics is a must. Jimmy Marinos, the drummer, one of my favorite drummers again of that era. Just unique. He was probably the first guy that I saw set up with the flat toms, like off to the side, not really like, kind of like in front of him and not over the bass drum. So he was, his playing style was like this, and he played open-handed, which not a lot of drummers do, hardly any do that. And he sang, and he was super like energetic and like visual, stick twirling. He was the fucking shit. He was great. And he sang What I Like About You and some of the other songs. Him and Wally Palmer would split the vocals and a lot of stuff. I think Mike Skill might have sang. Is it the bass player Mike Skill? I don't remember. But generally it was either Jimmy Marinos or Wally Palmer singing all the songs. And just a great tight band, killer shit. And so the debut record is a must. And actually, the follow-up, National Breakout, is really good too. The title track's killer. But the fourth record, because they did one in 81 called Strictly Personal, which was their third record. Bizarre, because it's real heavy. It's almost like a heavy metal record. Like they just crank the guitars up, and it's like in your face, and it's good. I mean, to me, the first four Romantics records, you can't really go wrong with any of them. But if you're gonna narrow it down, I would say the debut and the fourth record, In Heat, are like the two essential ones. In Heat had Talking in Your Sleep, One in a Million, Rock You Up, Open Up Your Door. Just really like well-written songs. You could tell they were trying to concentrate more on getting on the radio, a little more catchy hooks and stuff like that. It's well produced. They had MTV behind them. So that is I would say that's an essential record as well. You might not like everything on it, but there are great songs on it, and it was a big hit for them. It really put them back on the map after falling off the map for a little while with What I Like About You was the big hit in 79 or 80. And they didn't do much for a couple of years after that. Then they came back with MTV really helped push them over the edge. And then they kind of disappeared after that. Jimmy Marinos left the band. They got another drummer in, put out Rhythm Romance, and which was just a very average record. And then they were done. And then they came back with 6149, which was a reunion record with Clem Burke on drums. And I think there was a few tracks with Jimmy Marinos on there. And that's a killer record too. More recent, but it sounds like a throwback. It's like, I think they did a Pretty Things cover on there. It's just for like a modern power pop sounding record. The 6149 record is killer from the Romantics. It's another one that I would say, if you want to hear what they did more recently, I would grab that too. Moving along, next would be Tommy Keene, the late great Tommy Keene. Right out of the gate, his singing voice is probably a little bit of an acquired taste. That being said, the guy was an incredible songwriter and an incredible guitar player. He played the guitar and leads on all of his records. His in fact, I think he was a touring guitarist for a while with Paul Westerberg. He's a power pop legend. People that are really heavily into power pop know who Tommy Keene is. I was lucky enough to see him live twice in Philadelphia at Grape Street Pub, and it wasn't the Khyber, it was another place, I forget, not North Star Bar. There was another small club in Philly, the name of it's escaping me, but the first time I saw him was in probably 96 or 98, and then again in the early 2000s. He passed in 2017. He was from DC. His debut EP came out in 82, Strange Alliance. He hates it. You really can't find it reissued anywhere. You can find it on YouTube, but he never reissued it. There's really never any songs from that on any of the compilations that were put out by him. It's a shame because there's really good songs on that record. Landscape is great. The title track, Strange Alliance, is great. Don't Get Me Wrong has a great riff and a great chorus. It's All Happening Today. They're great songs. I don't know why he doesn't like it. Maybe it's just because sound quality wise, it sounds a little low budget. Maybe he wasn't confident in his voice yet or his songwriting. There's a lot of Tommy Keene stuff out there. He put out, probably like 10 records, maybe more. One of the compilation records called The Real Underground is a really good one to try to pick up if you can, if you want to hear a lot of his early stuff. It's the compilation of the Real Underground EP and some other stuff from the mid-'80s. And songs like Back to Zero Now, Nothing Happened Yesterday, Mr. Roland, The Real Underground. That's a good sample of some of his earlier work. And then you had songs from the film, which was his major label debut in '86 on Geffen. That was kind of like supposed to be his big breakthrough. It got a lot of attention for him. He had an MTV video, but it just didn't happen for him. I think he was an opening act on some tours and stuff like that, but he just didn't catch on. Songs on that record: Paper Words and Lies, Kill Your Songs, a little cover, Run Now, Places That Are Gone. And then he came back in '96 with an album called 10 Years After, which blew me away when I heard it. He just turned up the guitars, just more in your face. It was just very aggressive, more so than any of his earlier stuff. And pretty much every song on that record is awesome. Going Out Again, Turning on Blue, which I think was in the video. Silent Town is great. Your Heart Beats Alone, On the Runway. It might even be his strongest record, I think. Because his albums that he's done after that, every album of his always has killer songs on it, and then there's like this middle ground stuff and some stuff where you can tell he has a certain sort of writing style, so you can hear, he kind of gets into, like, same thing with with later Cheap Trick records. It's not going to blow you away, and it's not bad, but it's kind of like them, like treading water. It's like what you would expect. And a lot of the Tommy Keene later stuff was like that. Always killer songs on every record, and then you would have some filler, not in a bad way, just not as good as, like the key tracks. You really can't go wrong with almost anything from him, but the ones that I mentioned would be the ones I would start with. Okay, next we're going to start getting into a little bit more new wave territory. And this next one is Devo, Freedom of Choice from 1980. My first Devo record. I had heard Can't Get No Satisfaction, which was bizarre. When Freedom of Choice came out, I was 10, and I got it as one of my Columbia Record House batches of records, because obviously I had heard Whip It, and I liked it, and Freedom of Choice I heard, and I liked that too. The thing I liked about Freedom of Choice was it had heavy guitar, it had like guitars on it, with the synths and the punchy, drum beats and stuff. It was like a really good combination, and catchy songs. You could just tell what a difference from the record before that, where it was a little bit, the emphasis was on a little bit more like avant-garde and strange stuff and weird time changes and stuff. And Freedom of Choice has a lot of that, but they really turned up the juice on trying to write catchier songs with hooks. And the record after that too, New Traditionalists, continued that, and that's a really good record too. Not as strong as Freedom of Choice, but New Traditionalists had It's a Beautiful World and Love Without Anger. They were two of the MTV videos, if I remember, working in the coal mine. Good record. But Freedom of Choice, you had Whip It, you had Girl You Want, Gates of Steel, which is killer, title track, which is killer, Freedom of Choice, and Mr. B's Ballroom. Pretty much the whole record is awesome. And it always sounded great in dance clubs. When I used to go to Emerald City in Cherry Hill, because my father was working there part-time as a crew guy, and I remember, and this was in 80 and 81, and that record was just so huge, and they would play it in there with with the giant sound system, and it just sounded so good, pumped through in a nightclub like that. So that's one of my memories of that record. Moving along, we've got Blondie, another power pop / new wave artist. My personal favorites from Blondie would be Parallel Lines from '78, produced by Mike Chapman, the genius. Did the Knack record, did all the sweet stuff. Not all the sweet stuff, but a lot of the essential sweet stuff. Did a few tracks on Nick Gilder's City Nights, I think. Chapman's a great producer. Just, has a way of just getting... And he did he do some Pat Benatar stuff, too, which we'll get into later. So, Parallel Lines, the breakthrough record for Blondie. Hanging on the Telephone, Picture This, One Way or Another, Fade Away and Radiate, and of course Hard to Blast, the Hughes song. Put her on the map. All of a sudden she was in all the rock magazines that I bought, Cream and Circus and all that stuff. And then she followed that up with Eat to the Beat from '79, which is another classic new wave record. The Dreaming, The Hardest Part, Union City Blue, Killer, one of my favorite Blondie songs. Accidents Never Happened, Atomic, and then of course you had the late great Clem Burke just driving the train on all this stuff, and a good combination of just edgy guitars and synths and hooks, just really top shelf stuff. On a side note, a few friends of mine saw Blondie open for Rush in '78 or '78 or '79. And after about 15 minutes, she got so many bottles thrown at them that they walked off the stage. And this is a Rush crowd, which, considerably rowdier in the 70s, I'm sure. But what a weird pairing. I mean, I know the 70s were known for some strange bills, but Blondie opening for Rush is like, that's crazy. I mean, they must have been petrified every night to go on stage. Next up, the producers, another Tom Werman production for the first two records. The debut was 1981. The follow-up, You Make the Heat, was 1982. These guys were all over MTV when I first got MTV. Pretty much right out of the gate. My grandmother had cable, so in August of '81 when MTV debuted, I was able to, I was over her house a lot, getting babysat because my mom worked night shift. So I was soaking up the MTV from day one. We eventually got cable not long after that in our apartment. And so, I was drowning in MTV 24/7 from like 81 to like 84. And right in the early days, they didn't have a lot of videos to show, so they were showing a lot of weird bands that you never heard of before, stuff from England and, unsigned bands with really low budget videos, really cool stuff. Everything made a real big impact on me. And the producers had two videos, What's He Got and Certain Kind of Girl. And the thing that struck me about them immediately was their keyboard player, Wayne Famous, was almost like a Rick Nielsen character. Very animated and goofy and, running around on stage with a guitar. And that immediately attracted, and the videos were kind of like cartoonish, you know what I mean? Like they had personality and great songs. The debut record is freaking phenomenal. The follow-up record is phenomenal. I don't understand how these guys just weren't huge, especially in that climate with MTV and that kind of music really being popular. It was just like, why were these guys not bigger than they were? Maybe it was a lack of touring, didn't get a lot of opening act slots, lack of exposure on the road. I don't know. It's a mystery. And even Tom Werman, I think, said it's a mystery as well, because he said it's one of the best bands he's ever produced. Musicianship-wise, drummer Brian Holmes, killer, kind of like a Bruce Gary meets like Stuart Copeland. Just tasty, solid, punchy, just the whole band, freaking awesome. And so the songs on these two records that I would recommend right out of the gate, What's He Got, Certain Kind of Girl, What She Does to Me, The End, Sensations, those were all on the debut record. The follow-up, the big song on that was She Sheila, which was covered by, I think, the Nelson Twins later on, Gunnar and Matthew. And then Butch Walker with Marvelous 3 recently did a cover of She Sheila, which is a really good version of that as well. That is one of the best power pop songs ever with anybody. It's just perfection. Like that I put that up there with like Dream Police. It's just, it has everything. It has the keyboards, the synths, the hooks, the punchy drums, just the melody. Everything about it is just flawless. It should have been a huge song, but again, and it was on MTV a lot, but it just didn't catch on. I don't know if they didn't get any radio play or whatever. But that song, Operation, Dear John, Breakaway, Merry Go Round, that album is just, it's got a little reggae, ska sort of blend kind of in there. It's kind of like maybe because the Police were big. I don't know, but great records, both of them. I can't recommend them enough. Next we have, speaking of Pat Benatar, we have Pat Benatar. And with her second and third records, second one, Crimes of Passion from 1980, and the third one, Precious Time from 1981. Killer power pop records. There was a sound back then, you know, like Sammy Hagar with Standing Hampton had it. I've Done Everything for You, and Your Love is Driving Me Crazy. I think it was on VOA. That was later. But Rick Springfield, Pat Benatar, Sammy Hagar, all had this sort of sound right around then. And I think a lot of it had to do with like Neil Giraldo's sort of writing style and production style. He had, I think he was involved with Rick Springfield's Working Class Dog, if I remember right. And so yeah, there was just this sound, and it was all great. You know, these two Pat Benatar records obviously had a different flavor to them than like, you know, Rick Springfield record. But Neil Giraldo, amazing producer, amazing songwriter, killer guitarist, super underrated. His solos are off the charts great. He's up there with Neil Schon and Lukather and all these guys that just tasty melodic solos, and in this power pop sort of genre, just really knew what he was doing. And of course, you had Pat singing. How could you go wrong? On these two records, the standout tracks for me: "Treat Me Right," "You Better Run," "Never Want to Leave You," "I'm Gonna Follow You," "Out of Touch," "Precious Time," "Promises in the Dark," classic. "Fire and Ice," another classic. I think "Hell is for Children" is on one or two of those. I don't have the track listing in front of me. The debut Pat Benatar record has its moments, but you can tell it wasn't really a full, cohesive sort of thing yet. The album, the one with Shadows of the Night, which is another stone cold classic song, just perfect from start to finish. Get Nervous, that was it. You know, these are the two records for me that are like the prime Benatar, especially if you're talking power pop new wave kind of era. Next, we have a Philly band, which you may or may not have heard of, called the A's. Their debut came out on Arista in '79, and then they only put out 2 records and an EP, and then they were done. The second record came out in '81 called "A Woman's Got the Power," which was covered by a few different artists and was actually a hit for them, I believe. And then they did a 4-song EP called "Four Dances" in 1982, and then they broke up. And it's a shame because the EP in '82 was probably the best thing they ever did. 4 songs on it: "Do the Dance," "Painting by Numbers," "Ain't No Secret," "Girl That I Love." All 4 of them, amazing. The production on it was great. It was like going out on a high note. There's an example of that right there. The debut came out after Last Night, CIA, which was a radio hit in Philly. CIA, Nothing Wrong with Falling in Love, Words, quirky, new wavy, power pop, sort of almost like, I think the singer Richard Bush was probably influenced by Bob Geldof a little bit. Had that sort of persona and sort of just vibe to him, you know. Super energetic frontman, just captured your attention. Woman's Got the Power, the follow-up, had the title track, which was a classic. How Do You Live, Johnny Silent, I Pretend She's You. Both of those records really well produced. They were on the road with the Kinks, I think, in '79 as an opening act, right when the Kinks were hitting big with low budget. And, you know, it just didn't happen for them. They were big in Philly, and they just didn't get the national attention that you would think that they would. They really didn't have an MTV video, which really hurt them. And it's a shame because they're up there along with the Hooters, which is another one, Philly area band, which the Hooters had the right formula and they had MTV and they managed to hit. They came along a little bit later. By 85 with Nervous Night, the Hooters just were in the right place at the right time with the right kind of music, and it worked for them. My favorite Hooters record is Amore, which was 82 or 83. Independently released, a lot more edgier, new wave-ish, got a lot more ska influence, kind of like the Police, meets like, I don't know, Joe Jackson or something. Just it has like that edgier sound to it. And that's my favorite Hooters record. David is a friend of mine, the drummer. He used to know my father back in the day. He'd play a lot of the same clubs, and he would go watch my father play. And there was some commonality going on back then. Dave was a lot younger than my dad, but their paths crossed a lot. My dad's band Cats and the Exceptions, and David at the time was in a band called Hot Property, and they were both trying to get signed at the same time in the Philly area. And my dad's band Cats got signed to Elektra, and Hot Property did not get signed. They were working with Ace Frehley briefly for a little while, and then they broke up, and then Dave ended up in the Hooters, and then the rest is history. He's a great guy, great drummer, super nice guy, just, good people. I'm fortunate he reached out to me when he saw my last name and he realized who my father was. We connected, and we've been friends ever since then. And again, a real good guy. So another addition that I would like to make to the essential list of power pop and new wave albums is my father's band Cats. Now I'm biased on this because it's my dad, but I think the record is a really strong record, and it's a shame that it didn't get any recognition beyond just a little bit of airplay across the country. There was no MTV at the time when the record came out in 1980. If they had been able to stick around for another album or two and maybe get a chance to make some videos, they might have been able to go somewhere. But they were a band that was assembled from a bunch of local cover band musicians that had been, seasoned guys that had been around for a while, and they all started recording demos together around 76, 77. So Cats was in a scene in Philadelphia right around the same time. They kind of got signed off of the heels of the Aids getting signed to Arista, which they put out the record in 79, and then my father's band Cats happened within a year of that. So there was a little bit of buzz going on, I think, in the Philadelphia area at the time, and there was a band called Baby Grand, which became the Hooters. And so it was like the A's got signed, and then my father's band, and then the Hooters didn't get signed to a major label until I think around 84, 85 when Nervous Night came out. But there was this buzz going on in the Philadelphia area. You had Robert Hazard and the Heroes putting out stuff, and the bands like Baru Review, all these bands that, you might not know about them unless you lived in this area. But Cats was kind of part of that in the beginning, and eventually it got to the point where they got signed to a management deal with Electric Factory Concerts owner Larry Magid, and he was a big power player in the Philadelphia concert scene. He was a promoter. So every show that came through the Philly area, he was the guy that ran Electric Factory Concerts. He was kind of like the, what's the guy's name? Ron Delsner in the New York area, and like Bill Graham in San Francisco, Larry Magid and Bill Rogers were the equivalent to that in the Philadelphia area. So anyway, they were the management team behind Cats, and they ended up getting them some showcase gigs. They opened for David Johansen at Emerald City in 79, which I actually have a video of somewhere. And they got signed that night to Elektra. And what happened was they ended up going to Bearsville to record their debut record, Todd Rundgren's famous, well, it's not Todd Rundgren's, it's Albert Grossman, I think his name, the guy that owns the place, but it was made famous because of Todd. Basically, Todd was like the guy that was always there. He had his own setup there. He had a barn that he set up there to do rehearsals with Utopia and stuff like that. So there was a tie-in with Todd Rundgren. He was kind of like the silent partner, I guess you could say, up there. So I got to go there, and during the band's pre-production for the record, while they were tearing apart the songs and reassembling them because the producer of the album wanted them to gear the album a little bit more towards the new wave market, you know, because of the Cars and stuff like that. They were kind of like a Philly rock band. You know, influences were probably more along the lines of like ELO and Hall & Oates and like Todd, and like they didn't really sound like anybody else, but they had like a Philly kind of sound to them. And the producer decided he wanted to take them in a direction, a more modern sounding direction, so they did pre-production demos and really tore apart the songs and reassembled them, rearranged them, which the band ended up not really being happy about. But the record ended up being a pretty solid new wave slash. There's elements of power pop in it, but it's a really good album. And they did a tour with Van Halen in the summer of 1980 for 2.5 months, which I have talked about in some other videos. And there's a podcast, there's a channel called Final Resonance TV. A guy named Jeff Goebel. Sorry, Jeff. He's an Eddie Van Halen centric YouTube page. Does a lot of stuff about Van Halen and Eddie Van Halen. So I did like a 3-hour interview with him a couple of years back. So there's a lot of info on the whole Cat story in that video, and the Van Halen tour and some of my experiences with that. But yeah, so they did the tour. They did some random shows with Judas Priest, opening for Judas Priest. They were the first band on at Rocklahoma in 1980. It was Cats, and then it was Sammy Hagar, Pat Benatar, the Doobie Brothers, and Van Halen. And they're not in any of the advertisements, but they are listed in the Cashbox attendance record reports and things like that. They just were kind of like put on as if they were like some local band, did like a 25-minute set, and they were done at like 11:30 in the morning. They came back, did some shows locally. They opened for Blue Oyster Cult at the Spectrum in Philly on the Cultosaurus Erectus tour, which was October of 1980. And they ended up breaking up. Just the stress of being on the road and the album not really taking off, and there was a lot of frustrations and some other things going on in the band, and then that was it. And it's a shame because the album was good, and I think another album would have been an opportunity for them to do something further if they could have gotten a video on MTV. The album is kind of in the Cars, new wave-ish sort of vein, and I'm going to be contacting Rock Candy Records, who does a lot of reissues of a lot of obscure sort of new wave AOR, power pop 80s kind of stuff, even bands that just really didn't go anywhere. And I'm going to tell them my story and let them know I have all these soundboard recordings of the band on the Van Halen tour. They can be used for bonus tracks and demos and some early versions of the songs. I don't know if they can get the masters from Elektra Records or not. I don't even know if they still exist. I have the acetate, the original acetate pressing of the album, which is in great shape and might be able to be used if they can do a new master off of that, if they're interested. But I'd like to see if they'd be interested in reissuing the CD. It deserves a proper release with some bonus tracks and some liner notes and stuff. And it's just as good as any other obscure new wave power pop record from any other band that didn't go anywhere that labels like Rock Candy have released. So I think it's worth a shot. I'm going to see what happens, and maybe one day you'll be seeing me do a review on my YouTube channel of the Rock Candy release of the Cats album. Fingers crossed. We'll see what happens. Moving on. The Jam. You know, sort of started out as a punk band. You know, In the City is a little more punkish. Not quite as punkish and heavy as the Sex Pistols. A little bit more like The Who. My Generation Who, you know, R&B, you know, that Motown R&B sort of version of punk, you know, with the punk energy. And then their second record, This Is the Modern World from '77, got slagged in the press, but it's one of my favorite Jam records. I would include that in my list of essential Jam records. Just for the title track alone, This Is the Modern World, one of the best Jam songs. But the follow-up record to that is really the one that kind of sealed the deal for those guys in Europe, and that's All Mod Cons. '78 came out, and it was the perfect combination of them incorporating some modern new wave production techniques The recordings got cleaner, the songs got a little catchier, a little more well-written, more melodic. Title track, All Mod Cons, is great. Down in the Tube Station at Midnight, classic song. English Rose, great ballad. In the Crowd, that was like, their benchmark record. And everything after that had to kind of live up to that. Some of it did, some of it didn't. The album after that, Setting Suns, another really good, strong record. Thick as Thieves was on that. Eating Rifles, Girl on the Phone, Private Hell, all considered jam classics, They were kind of treading water with that record, and then they came back with Sound Effects in 1980, which I think is a superior record. A lot more hooks, a little bit more Motown influence going on, while still retaining the power pop new wave kind of angle. A little more Beatle-esque in some spots. Pretty Green, which is great. Start, which kind of rips off the Taxman bass riff. Boy About Town, Man in the Corner Shop, That's Entertainment, Monday. These are the albums that really made a huge influence on later Britpop bands, like the Gallagher brothers in Oasis, the guys in Blur. The Jam was the template, because the Jam, while couldn't really get arrested in the United States, they barely toured here at all. I think they opened for Blue Oyster Cult, which is another stupid freaking lineup. I mean, Blue Oyster Cult, I love Blue Oyster Cult, but the Jam opening for, it's like chalk and cheese, or whatever the British saying is. Not good. They never hit in the States. They sort of hit later with the Gift record, because they had Town Called Malice, which is another classic, sort of Motownish power pop new wave kind of thing. It was all over MTV. It was a big hit on MTV, actually. But it just didn't translate into anything in the United States. They were announcing a farewell tour after that record. In the UK and in Europe, they were a stadium act. And, smaller places too, but they were a stadium act. And for some reason, they just didn't hit in the States. Which is a shame. So they were hugely influential on the British music pop scene. Everybody that was into that sort of music loved the Jam. They were just the darlings of their home country, and it's a shame they just never really hit here. They put out some great singles too that were never on any of their albums. Going Underground, Strange Town, songs that just never ended up on records. They were just huge singles in England. So I want to check out some good Jam stuff. I would look up those two songs as well. Next up is the Divinyls. New wave, yeah, I would say. A little tinge of power pop, new wave in there. They didn't sound like anybody else. Christina Amphlett, I guess is how you pronounce her last name, the late, great Christina Amphlett. They were an Australian band. She was super unique. Nobody sounds like her. She doesn't sound like anybody. When you hear her speaking voice, she's like this prim and proper sort of Australian kind of like, delicate sounding woman, very high class. And then you hear her sing and you see her on stage and she's like a freaking animal, just vicious, like all over the stage, jumping around, energetic, angry in spots. Just one of the best front women, of all time. A unique singing voice and a unique sort of accent when she sings, the way she pronounces words and stuff like that. Might not be for everybody, but I think it worked in the context of what she was doing in the Divinyls. And the first couple of records, the debut, Desperate from '83, Boys in Town, killer freaking song. Just look that up, it's amazing. Science Fiction, that's a great song. Take a Chance is great, Make You Happy, Only Lonely, another great pop song on that record. And then they had a follow-up in '84 called What a Life. The debut was pretty successful. The follow-up, I don't know if it was as successful. They had a lot of MTV videos, but I feel like MTV really didn't support them a whole lot for some reason. You would see their videos occasionally. They were just, again, bigger in their home country of Australia, bigger in Europe. They were always opening for people here in the States. They're headlining smaller clubs. I think they did an MTV concert from the Ritz around this period. But What a Life is a great record. Pleasure and Pain. Good Die Young, that's a great song. Sleeping Beauty is awesome. Casual Encounter. Really good 1-2 punch. Debut and a follow-up record. The records after that were spotty. They disappeared and then they came back in like 91 or 92 with the self-titled record and I Touch Myself, which was a huge song for them. Not keeping in line with their earlier sound, it sounded similar, but it was a little more, I don't know, not as edgy, but a great pop song. And of course, her in the video sold it. That was a big song for them. And then they kind of really didn't do much after that. I think they toured a little bit, and unfortunately she passed away within the last, I want to say, 5 or 6 years. That was a real shock. It was ashamed to see that. I was hoping to get to see them maybe tour, but it just wasn't going to happen. Next, The Records, with the late, great John Wicks on lead vocals and guitar. The Records were formed out of the ashes of a band called the Kersal Flyers. I'm not really sure how to pronounce that. Drummer Will Birch was a member of that band, part of the English pub scene back then, with like Brinsley Schwartz, which were some of the guys from Graham Parker and the Rumor, and there was that, I guess, sort of influenced by like Dr. Feelgood and that sort of stuff that was going on in England at the time. And so Kersal Flyers split up, and Will Birch hooked up with John Wicks, and they put out a string of power pop records. The debut in '79 was called Shades in Bed in the UK, and in the US it was just called The Records. Songs, they had a hit with Starry Eyes. If you've heard, know anything about power pop, you've probably heard Starry Eyes. Classic song. Other songs, Girl, Up All Night, All Messed Up and Ready to Go, Teen-A-Rama. It's really good, solid, jangly power pop, but yet with a little bit of a new wave edge to it, and grittier, a little grittier guitars and spots. Great melodies, like vocal melody, like harmonizing and stuff like that. A lot of good background vocals on all these records. The follow-up from '80 was called Crashes, and that had songs like Rumor Sets the Woods Alight, Girl in the Golden Disc, Guitars in the Sky, Spent a Week with You Last Night. Another really good follow-up record. You can't go wrong with either of those two. They put out a few records after that, spotty and not real super consistent, but still quality stuff on all the records. John eventually put out an album called Rockola with his own version of the records in the mid-90s, and that also has some really good stuff on it. It's very hard to find. It was just an independent release, and not that many were pressed. And I was lucky enough to hang out with John, again through my friend Ken Sharp, when we went to see the Knack, and the Knack original reunion show down in D.C., and John was living down in that area, and so we went to his house and hung out with him in his rehearsal space downstairs, and I actually got behind his drummer's drum kit, and me and Ken goofed around and started playing some stuff off the first Knack record, which was a lot of fun. I wish we had cell phones back then. I'd like to have some footage of that. It's one of those crazy moments in my life where just the stars aligned, and I got to do some cool stuff with some cool people that I really admired. And John Wicks was one of them. I admired his work in the records, and he was a real nice guy. And the fact that I got to hang out with the guys from the Knack that same night, Bruce Gary in his hotel room, just shooting shit for like 20 minutes. Just sort of things. If you told me when I was like 9-10 years old I was going to do when I was an adult, I'd be like, get the fuck out of here. That's never going to happen. And just the universe has a funny way of lining up things, and I've been really lucky to experience some of that stuff, and a lot of that I'm thankful to Ken for, because he managed to arrange a lot of that stuff for me, and I'm very lucky and fortunate to have been able to do those things. So thanks, Ken. So next we're moving on to Donnie Iris, Aaliyah, a song I'm sure you've heard. It was his big hit. Great song, classic. His first two records, definitely sort of like in that 80s power pop, commercial / a little bit of new wave influence going on, the skinny tie thing. Back on the Streets, his debut from 1980 has Aaliyah, classic song. I Can't Hear You, Agnes, Joking, Back on the Streets. And then his follow-up, King Cool, from 81. The hit off of that was Love Is Like a Rock. That was, on MTV, a live version, a show that they taped for an MTV concert, I think. And King Cool, the title track, Sweet Merrily, The Promise, Pretender, That's the Way Love Ought to Be, Broken Promises. I think King Cool, the follow-up, is probably a little bit better than the debut, which is rare. A lot of times the debut record sets the standard, but those two records are great. Kevin Valentine, on a side note, the drummer, ended up going on to play drums as a ghost drummer on Kiss's reunion record, Psycho Circus. And I remember when that came out in 1998, thinking to myself, this doesn't sound like Peter Criss playing the drums. And I was, as a drummer, was pretty fairly convinced it wasn't. There was one song on Psycho Circus that was the Ace Frehley song, Into the Void. That sounded like Peter. And that's the only song on that record that is all four original Kiss members, just the Ace Frehley song. And you can tell when you listen to it, it's just got that sound. It's a little looser. And apparently, Ace Frehley is not on most of Psycho Circus either. So Bruce Kulick is. Or Tommy Thayer and Bruce Kulick. I think it was a mixture of the two. A lot of that comes down to the producer, the late Bruce Fairbairn. Fairbairn? It's spelled Fairbairn, but everybody says Fairburn. So I don't know. Maybe it is Fairburn. I'm not sure. Regardless, he did Slippery When Wet and all the classic Loverboy records, Get Lucky and all that stuff. Amazing producer, but I feel like they were hell-bent on trying to get onto the radio, and he's the kind of producer that, wants studio perfection. I don't think he was, from what I understand, wasn't down with just letting those guys jam in the studio and be loose and, not to a click track and not perfect, perfection or whatever. We all wanted a raw, original Kiss record, flaws and all. Even if Peter Criss was, playing a little slower, a little fast. I never thought he had studio tempo problems, but he's not the kind of drummer that, like, a mega producer like Bruce Fairbairn is going to want to use. They want these guys that are like, human drum machines. And that's not what the original Kiss was all about. It was a little bit about the ebb and flow and the feel and the vibe, with Ace and with Peter. I would have rather heard a original Kiss record with that sort of sound and vibe than this slick, perfect Psycho Circus, which is what we got. Not that it's a bad record, but anyway, I'm getting off on a tangent because I'm a Kiss guy. Kevin Valentine from Donny Iris played the drums on that record. And I think he played the drums on a Cinderella record too, maybe Still Climbing. Next, we are moving on to the Posies. Now, the Posies, Seattle band, kind of started out as an indie duo. Failure, I think, was their debut. John and Ken. John Auer and Ken Stringfellow. They really kind of came into their own when they got signed to Geffen, and they put out Dear 23, which was 1990. Very much a big star, meets like 60s psychedelic. Tom Peterson referred to them as the heavy metal Hollies because they had these Hollies type of vocal harmonies and stuff, and it's pretty accurate. Actually, the vocals, John and Ken, they remind me of a cross between Mickey Dolenz from the Monkees and like Kevin Cronin from REO Speedwagon, which might make them cringe if they heard that. I don't know. You never know. I love REO, but to me, when I hear their voices, they have that quality. It sounds like Mickey Dolenz and and Cronin from REO Speedwagon singing power pop music, and so Dear 23 came out, and I think the video was Suddenly Mary, and maybe Golden Blunders. I've been videos for both of them. Flood of Sunshine is great. Any Other Way. It's very much an ambient, still carried over an 80s sort of production. Big Star, the Hollies, Beatles, jangly sort of power pop. Really, really good stuff. And then on the follow-up, Frosting on the Beater, which was 93, they got in Butch Vig to produce the record, and they just cranked up the guitars, and it was a lot grungier sounding, sort of like a power pop version of like the Foo Fighters or something. Killer though. I mean, it's one of my favorite records of the 90s. And like Tom Peterson said, the heavy metal Hollies. Loud guitars, Hollies type of harmonies, hooks. There's some depth. There's a lot of depth to the lyrics and, you know, songwriting and arrangements. You know, not your typical Seattle grunge band. You know, you could tell that they were really into other things. You know, Big Star and Cheap Trick and the Beatles and the Hollies and probably the Monkees and stuff like that. Dream All Day was the video off of that. Definite Door, I think, was the video as well. 2 killer songs off the record. Flavor of the Month. I was lucky enough to see them on that tour at the TLA in Philly, and which was mind-blowing, just killer, and such a small place too. And the original drummer, Mike Musburger, is one of my favorite drummers of that genre of music, especially. Keith Moon, you know, just all these big drum fills and killer solid snare sound, and it's perfect for that band. When he left after that, I think the bass player left, and they got 2 other guys in, and the drummer's name was Brian, and the bass player was a guy named Joe Skyward, I think. And they put out a record after that on Geffen. It was the last record on Geffen. That has some great songs on it too. I just can't remember the name of it. And I saw them on that tour. Oh, Amazing Grace. Sorry, it just took me. Things take me a little while longer now. You know, when you're our age. Saw them on that tour at the Mercury Lounge in New York City. Tiny club. Killer. Again, blew the roof off the place. And then I didn't see them live again until recently. I think it was about right after COVID, probably about 4 years ago. They reunited with the original Frosting on the Beater Deer 23 lineup, and they did a celebration of the Frosting on the Beater record, played it, I think, from start to finish. I got to meet all of them, got to meet Mike Musburger, the drummer, who I really like, and that was just so cool. And they killed it. It was just a friggin' awesome show. It was at the not the Hard Rock Cafe, the World Cafe, live at the WXPN's venue in Philly. They used to do so many cool covers. They would do Song of a Baker from the Small Faces and Ooh Child, that one-hit wonder from the 70s, and just really cool choices for cover songs that they always did on B-sides and stuff like that. You can find all of that stuff on YouTube, I'm sure now, like everything else. Next up, Nick Gilder. Hot Child in the City. Amazing songwriter. A very unique singing voice. I always thought he was a female when I heard Hot Child in the City as a kid. I thought it was a girl singing it. He's just got that kind of a very feminine kind of voice. He's a great songwriter. He's written songs for other people. He wrote The Warrior for Scandal. Pat Benatar covered his Rated X on her debut record. Yeah, he's a talented guy. And again, another one of those guys that just never, besides Hot Child in the City, just never was able to capitalize on that beyond that. His debut record, You Know Who You Are from 77, is a must. It's Roxy Roller, Tantalize, Backstreet Noise, Rated X, Runaways in the Night, All Across the Nation. These are all like sweet influence, like a little bit of the sweet in there, like glam, edgy, heavy guitars, you know, just really just great stuff. I mean, you can't go wrong with it. I know I say that a lot, but it's the truth. And then City Nights, the follow-up in 78, which had Hot Child in the City on it, the big song, partly produced by Mike Chapman. Other songs, Got to Get Out, We'll Work It Out, She's One of the Boys, Here Comes the Night, and another basically near flawless record of solid, edgy, punchy, new wave-ish sort of power pop. He had like a string of like 3 or 4 really good records back then, but those are the 2 standouts for me as far as Nick Gilder goes. Next up, we have The Pretenders. Everybody knows who The Pretenders are, right? The Pretenders' first 2 records, the debut and Pretenders 2, really are the prime releases from them for me. I mean, you know, what's the one? What's the third one? Learning to Crawl. That has some great stuff on it too. But Pretenders' debut from 1980, Brass in Pocket, Precious, Tattooed Love Boys. You know, Up the Neck, The Weight, Kid, Talk of the Town, Message of Love. Well, actually, I'm getting into the second record now. Message of Love, Talk of the Town, Birds of Paradise, Mystery Achievement, The Adulteress. Those first two records are just killer. What a killer band. Just the chemistry that was there. You know, this perfect combination of just attitude, a little bit of punk attitude, great pop influence songwriting, hooks, great guitar work, you know, like that slashing kind of like, you know, new wave sort of guitar work. Martin Chambers, killer drummer, you know, unique. Definitely when you watch him play, it's the caveman hitting drums. Just a great band. It's a shame that James Honeyman Scott and Pete Farndon both passed away right after the second record. It's really, you know, young guys, drugs, you know, it's tragic, you know. The band could have stayed together, you know, who knows what they could have done after that, but essential listening to the first two Pretenders records, 100%. Next up, Jellyfish. Jellyfish only put out two records. Band from San Francisco area, the Bay Area. 1990 was the debut, called Belly Button. To describe these guys, it's almost impossible. Like a combination of like ELO, Supertramp, The Beatles, The Beach Boys, Queen, Bubblegum, you know, like just everything thrown into Cheap Trick, you know, like thrown into like this pot. And they spit out these two records. The debut, The King is Half Undressed, All I Want Is Everything, That Is Why, Calling Sarah, Now She Knows She's Wrong. Those are like the key songs for me off of that record. And then Spilt Milk, the follow-up from 93. They turned up the guitars a little bit more, beefed up the Queen harmonies, and Joining a Fan Club, killer. Ghost at Number One, killer. New Mistake, a classic power pop song. All Is Forgiven, which is like Queen, like the Queen harmonies all over the place. Sabrina, Paste, and Play-Doh is like this like Partridge Family kind of thing. Stand-up drummer Andy Sturmer stood up when he played the drums, kind of like Slim Jim from Stray Cats. Roger Manning, the keyboard player, and in that band ended up putting out some really good solo stuff. And on the first record, Jason Faulkner, who also is another guy I would recommend his first couple of actually almost anything from him, but his first couple of solo records especially. Can You Still Feel? And I think the debut was Author Unknown, like late 90s. Progressive power pop. This power pop with, you know, really adventurous sort of arrangements and writing style, and some of it had some Joe Jackson sort of, the one song, I Live, sounds like Joe Jackson looks sharp, you know, he has great influences, you know, and he puts out great quality stuff. He's another guy that's just pumps out great songs. But he was on the first Jellyfish record. He left. A guy named Eric Dover came in, took over from him on guitar, and Eric Dover is a guy that put out Imperial Drag, one record. Maybe it was two records, but I know that the debut was the one that everybody talks about. And then he kind of disappeared. I think he was in Slash's Snake Pit for a little while early on. But yeah, Jellyfish, those two records, I was lucky enough to see them live like 3 times. They opened for Tears for Fears at the Tower on Spilt Milk. All 3 times I saw them was the second tour, Spilt Milk, after Jason Faulkner left. And then they headlined the Trocadero in Philly, and then they headlined Stone Pony in Asbury Park, and I went to all 3 of those. They weren't around very long, so if you got to see them live, you were lucky. And I'm very lucky that I got to see them live. And they never reunited, ever. It's just, Andy was dealing with some drug issues and stuff, and then he started writing soundtrack music and, you know, for like films and commercials and stuff like that, and cartoons, I think, or whatever. And he just doesn't want to do it. And I think the other guys would do it, but I think he's the holdout, so we'll probably never see that, unfortunately. Moving along, Todd Rundgren, the master. I mean, yeah, he's got so many records. Obviously, to me, his late 60s and his entire 70s output up until like about 81 or 82 is the prime era. I could mention a lot of records. I'm going to keep it pretty simple and say Something Anything, the double record from 72, which of course has the classic I Saw the Light, Hello, It's Me, two all-time power pop classic songs, AM radio classic songs, just, amazing. It wouldn't have made any difference. Killer Ballad. Couldn't I Just Tell You, which is like a Raspberries knockoff. Rumor has it he was in the studio and heard the Raspberries in the studio next to him and decided that he was going to write a Raspberries sounding song, and if that's a true story, that's exactly what he did, because it sounds like the Raspberries. Black Mariah is great. Torch Song, beautiful ballad. Little Red Lights, it's got like this Ricky Nielsen, sounds like the House is Rockin' riff off of Dream Police. It's like the same kind of riff. I'm wondering if Rick kind of lifted it for that song. That's a great record, and so much good stuff from Todd in the 70s. I mean, all the Utopia stuff, Oops, Wrong Planet, Raw, a lot of that stuff was more progressive, less power pop, until you get to 1980s Utopia, Adventures in Utopia, which is a new wave power pop, start to finish. The Road to Utopia, killer song. You Make Me Crazy, Set Me Free is power pop. Caravan, Last of the New Wave Riders, The Very Last Time. That version of Utopia, the later version with Willie Wilcox and Roger Powell, Todd, and Chasm Sultan, was just like this unit of just a killer type band. Everything that they did was really excellent stuff. Luckily, I saw the reunion show of them. Was it 2019 or 18? I think at the Tower in Philly, and it was everybody except Roger Powell, who I think he has arthritis issues and couldn't do the tour. And they had a fill-in keyboard player who did a great job. But to see Willie Wilcox on drums and Chasm and Todd on the same stage together playing all these songs and the older Utopia stuff, it was freaking awesome. Loved it. I never thought I would ever get to see them. A side note, when my dad's band Cats was recording their debut at Bearsville Studio in 1980, I remember him telling me that he saw in the main drum room Willie Wilcox's motorcycle electronic drum kit, which was pretty state-of-the-art at the time. And I remember him describing it to me as I went up for a weekend and saw, got to visit Bearsville and walk around a little bit. I didn't get to see too much there, but I did get to see some stuff in the studio, and huge history behind that place. So that was just another amazing moment for me, just being able to be in there, knowing, I think the Rolling Stones were in there doing something like either a few months before that, or they were getting ready to come in. I don't know if they were working on Emotional Rescue or doing overdubs on something. I don't know why they were there, but they were there apparently. Didn't run into Todd, unfortunately, but so that was a great experience. But anyway, Todd Rundgren, so many good songs. I mean, even just the later albums, and even up to like 80 and 81, where he was putting out like Time Heals is a great song. There's so much stuff. If you're into power pop, I don't have to tell you. You know for yourself. And if you're just discovering Todd, definitely get on YouTube and just do a deep dive on any of his stuff from the 70s. And the Nas is another one. His Nas stuff that he did, the 3 records. It's really 2 and then a third of outtakes and stuff like that, leftovers. But I think they were it was like 68, 69 that those records came out. Open My Eyes, power pop classic. Sounds like The Who. Can't Explain. It's got that opening riff. And Todd's really first introduction to our introduction to Todd, the world's introduction to Todd Rundgren as a songwriter. The Nas, just great power pop stuff, very influenced by The Who and Cream, power trio stuff. So moving along, the next selection would be Spring Session M from Missing Persons, featuring the amazing Terry Bozzio on drums, formerly of Frank Zappa. Another example of incredible musicians coming together to do I wouldn't say simple music, because they really kind of threw in a lot of quirky, different sort of stuff. I mean, it's not like prog or anything, but it's a definite more interesting take on new wave music. A lot of that has to do with Terry's drumming. There's just a lot of crazy stuff going on drumming wise, which kind of elevates it to another level. above the typical new wave sort of sound. And when Words came out and they started playing that on the radio like in '81, I was immediately just like, wow, who the hell is this? What a freaking great song. And then on MTV you started seeing the videos for that and for Mental Hopscotch and for Destination Unknown. 3 great songs, but the record is filled with excellent songs. Walking in LA, Windows, US Drag. It's just a really great new wave record with a lot of balls and a lot of punch to it. So unfortunately, the follow-up records after that really didn't live up to the greatness of the debut. But now we're going to get into what I was talking about earlier with a band called Enough's Enough, which kind of straddles the hair metal power pop sort of line. They kind of have a foot in each door, mainly because of their look. The debut record came out in 1989. I remember being blown away when I first heard New Thing and saw the video, all this Dayglow stuff and the peace signs. They were kind of like a hippie version, the hippie Beatles version of like Poison or something, visually. Musically, they were in line with what I like. They were like Cheap Trick with a little bit of like Squeeze and the Beatles, and just like super melodic. They were similar to a band which I wasn't aware of at the time when this record came out. There was a band called Off Broadway, which I will also get into right after this. Chicago area band. When I first heard Off Broadway a few years later, the writing style and the singing style, immediately I was like, oh, the guys in Enough's Enough must have been going to see these guys in the bars constantly in Illinois when they were forming, because you can hear a huge influence from Off Broadway on Enough's Enough and the music. So I'm sure Donnie and Chip were very influenced by those guys. But anyway, the debut Enough's Enough record came out, and there was a lot of buzz around them. They had a lot of MTV coverage for Fly High Michelle and for a New Thing, and they were touring a lot, and I think they were opening for a lot of bands. I saw them at L'Amour's up in Brooklyn, right when that first record came out. It was like a midnight show on like a Thursday night or something crazy like that. And they did like Dear Prudence and just unreleased songs that weren't on the record. It was an awesome show. I actually taped it. The follow-up actually is the better record, Strength, which was from 1991. That to me is a classic. I mean, it's just perfect. The songwriting on that is incredible. It took everything about the first record and just elevated it to another level, just a little bit more sophisticated. Just amazing songs on that record. It should have been huge. I think their image held them back. I think that was 91, so that was right at the cusp of Nirvana and Pearl Jam. Just bad timing. If those guys came out and were signed and put those records out like in 86 and 87, or even 85 and 86, I think they would have really taken off. They were on Howard Stern all the time. He loved the band. I actually met Chip and Donnie at a Howard Stern book signing in Philadelphia on South Street for Private Parts when he put out that book. And they were really cool guys. I think I have some pictures somewhere. If I can find them, I'll post them in the video here. And unfortunately, there was no singles off of that record that took off. It's amazing to me. I don't know if it was a lack of a push from the record company, lack of radio airplay. Those guys are such good songwriters, and they put out a lot of records, and every single record that they did in the 90s especially, quality stuff on every single record. Chip and Donnie did an album called Brothers, which was basically an Enough's Enough record for Japan that was not called Enough's Enough. Just anything you can find from these guys. Now the records that they've done without Donnie V after he left are still not bad records, but the real magic and the chemistry is in probably the first like 4 or 5 records. Unfortunately, guitarist Derek Frigo passed away after the third record, Animals with Human Intelligence, which was another pretty decent record. New label, they went from Atco to Arista. Again, just not a hit song on any of them. But My favorite key tracks off of the first two records would be New Thing, Fly High Michelle, For Now, Little Indian Angel, Heaven or Hell, Strength is Killer, In Crowd, The World is a Gutter, Goodbye, Mother's Eyes, Baby Loves You, The Way Home, Coming Home. I mean, I could just go on and on. The whole Strength record from start to finish, it's pretty flawless. So I would check out either of those two records if you want a starting point with the band Enough's Enough. Next, we're going to move on to the band that I think heavily influenced them, which is a band called Off Broadway. Produced by Tom Werman, they put out two records on Atlantic. The first one was called On from 1979. And the second one is called Quick Turns from 1980. And very much in line with the whole Chicago area sound with Cheap Trick, Pez Band, just there's a sound that some of the bands from that area seem to have. Really good, strong records. Lead singer Cliff Johnson, who passed away fairly recently. Really unique frontman. He was in Pez Band originally, and there's some cool stuff, demos and stuff that he did with Pez Band that you can find on YouTube. There's a song called Tracer, which is really, really awesome. That ended up on the first Pez Band record after he left. He left that band and formed Off Broadway. He was in a band called The Thumbs, D''Thumbs, The Thumbs. Pretty funny name. I haven't really heard anything from them. I don't think they did much outside of some demos and stuff. It's hard to find anything online. But they got signed to Atlantic when he started Off Broadway. Tom Werman came in, and it's a typical Tom Werman production along the lines of like the producers and that sort of thing. Just really good radio-friendly, guitar-driven with some synth flourishes and stuff. The key tracks on both of those records for me would be Stay in Time, Bad Indication, You Belong to You, Showdown, Automatic, Boys Must Be Strong, U.S. Girls. Check them out on YouTube, and if you like them, see if you can find the physical. I think it's hard to find the CDs. You can still find the vinyl here and there, but really good stuff. Then we're going to move along to Red Cross. The main two records I like from Red Cross are Third Eye, which came out in 1990 on Atlantic, their major label, I guess, debut. They did records before that. They had, there was a record before that, Neurotica, with an independent release. A little more punky, kind of thrashy, punky sort of vibe with like power pop overtones. But Third Eye came out in 1990, and it's like bubblegummy sort of thing. If you like Jellyfish, you'll like Third Eye. It's got some similar vibes going on, and look-wise too. I'm kind of wondering who ripped off who, because you look at the cover of Third Eye, they look like the guys in Jellyfish, and then you look at Jellyfish, they look like the guys in Red Cross. Like, they dressed very similar, sounded very similar. I don't know if they were aware of each other back then before they got signed, but there's a lot of cross-pollination going on there. And then they released Phase Shifter in 1993, which is the follow-up, and it was a lot heavier, very guitar-driven. And they put out some records since then, off and on. The brothers, McDonald brothers, Steve and Jeff. They've always put out records every few years, and it kind of just flies under the radar. Usually some pretty decent stuff. But these two records I'm going to recommend as the two you should seek out first if you're looking for any Red Cross stuff. Key tracks: Jimmy's Fantasy, Lady in the Front Row, Monolith, Annie's Gone, Faith Healer, Zira, Call Out My Name. So next we're going to go to Graham Parker and the Rumor. My favorite record from him is Squeezing Out Sparks from '79. This is when he went from being more of a pub rock sort of sound, kind of similar to like, he had like this Van Morrison, early Elvis Costello sort of vibe, but not Costello in the Attractions. More like stuff of Miami's True. By '79, I guess the new wave bug, he got bitten by it. And he put out Squeezing Out Sparks, and it's got that Costello and the Attractions, Joe Jackson sort of vibe. The band, The Rumor, his backing band, kicked it up a little notch with just a little bit, heavier guitars, a little bit more of a slick new wave production. Great songs. I met him. He was opening for Cheap Trick on that tour in May of '79 at the Spectrum, my first Cheap Trick show, and they were touring off the heels of Budokan. And he had just released Squeezing Out Sparks and Discovering Japan, and Local Girls were like on the radio in Philly. So I kind of knew who he was, but I wasn't super familiar. My dad knew who he was. So my dad got us backstage, and I met Graham Parker in his dressing room. And luckily, right time, right place, Rick Nielsen happened to be in his dressing room at the same time. This was after Graham Parker had already done his set, and Cheap Trick was getting ready to go on within 20 minutes or so, half hour. And Rick was back there when we went back there, and I was 9, and I was just losing my mind. I mean, Rick Nielsen, he's a tall guy anyway. He's over 6 foot tall. I'm a 9-year-old kid. I'm looking up at him, and he's got the sweater on and the baseball cap and all the buttons. And he's like, "Hey, kid, you're going to enjoy the show, blah, blah, blah." And then he's like, "I'll arm wrestle you for a guitar pick." And he puts his arm up, and I put my arm up, and we're in the air like this, and he's going back and forth, and he lets me beat him. And then he pulls one of his signature guitar picks out of his sweater and hands it to me. And he says, "Enjoy the show, kid." And, I'm stunned, I'm like in awe. And I had that guitar pick up until probably the early 90s. And it got lost, or it got stolen out of my bedroom, I think maybe from somebody who was in my room, a friend or whoever, because I had his guitar pick and Eddie Van Halen's guitar pick in the same little jewelry box. Eddie Van Halen's pick was the one that my dad got me when he was on the Van Halen tour. And the jewelry box just disappeared one day, never to be found ever again anywhere. And I don't know what happened. I mean, I used to have people in and out of my house all the time, in and out of my bedroom as a teenager and in my early 20s, and we would have, friends over and stuff. And I don't know if it was taken or not, but it just disappeared one day, and I never saw it ever again, which really sucks because it was 2 guitar picks in the same case gone. But anyway, Graham Parker and the Rumors, Squeezing Out Sparks, great new wave record. The record after that, The Up Escalator, has some good stuff on it too. Temporary Beauty, I think, is on that record. And moving along, we're going to go to The Pursuit of Happiness. Debut record came out in 1988 called Love Junk, produced by Todd Rundgren. Has Todd Rundgren's stamp all over it. It sounds like, kind of like a Utopia sort of record, but, that's just because of Todd's production values and stuff like that. The songs on it are great, very punchy, edgy, funny lyrics, guitar-driven, solid in-your-face drum, cracking snare drum, And Mo Berg, the guy that writes all the songs for the band, just a really witty sort of songwriter. If you like any of that kind of like Todd Rundgren new wave sort of stuff that he did, like Utopia and everything, I think you would dig this record. They put out a few records after that and never really took off. Todd did their follow-up record too. I thought this record should have been bigger than it was, but it just didn't have any legs as far as radio or MTV or anything like that. And it just came out. There was a huge critic buzz going on that, but never went any further than that. Moving along, Paul Collins' Beat. Debut record from 1979, and the follow-up record, The Kids Are the Same, which I think is 81 or 82. Very Knack influenced. The debut record came out the same year as Get the Knack. I think they were from the same area. I'm sure there was some competition or cross-pollination going on, maybe. I don't know. The debut Paul Collins Beat record sounds a lot like Get the Knack. It's good stuff, but you can tell there's a huge influence. And I don't know if that's just coincidence or not, but regardless, really good, solid power pop record. Don't Wait Up For Me, Rock and Roll Girl, Walking Out on Love, Working Too Hard, I Don't Fit In. They're all great songs off of that record. The second record got a little bit more polished and a little bit more less high energy. Their video off of that record was On the Highway, which they used to show like late at night on MTV, like in 82. And that's got great songs on it too. So I would check out either one of those 2 records. He's considered a power pop legend. the way like Tommy Keys and stuff in the power pop world. Next, the Plimsouls. My favorite from them is the Plimsouls Plus compilation from 1981. It has all of their earlier songs on it, and then they ended up putting out Everywhere at Once from 1983, which had the hit Million Miles Away on it, which I think was in 16 Candles or one of those 80s movies. And yeah, Plimsouls, great sort of LA area, part of that whole knack scene, 79, 80, 81, but just slightly different. They had just a little bit, they were a little, I don't want to say edgier, but just, they were similar to the Knack, but I don't know, there was a difference there if you listen to them. I would say the best songs from the Plimsouls for me would be like Lost Time, Now, 0 Hour, Million Miles Away, of course, Hush Hush, In This Town, Shaky City, Oldest Story in the World. Next, Material Issue, the late, great Jim Ellison, who committed suicide, unfortunately, a while back. I was lucky enough to see them at J.C. Dobbs in Philadelphia one time on this tour, Freak City Soundtrack, 1994, which is their third record, and they turned up the volume on it. Loud, distorted guitars, very in your face, killer record. Kim the Waitress, Going Through Your Purse, One Simple Word, She's Going Through My Head. Their first two records were a little more jangly, you know, and good stuff on those records. Diane, What Girls Want were the big songs off of those first couple of records, but they really turned up the volume on the third record, and when I saw them at Dobbs, and they blew the freaking roof off the joint. Just incredible performers. Jim Ellison was amazing on stage, great guitar player, just high energy. I mean, it's a damn shame that they just didn't make it bigger, and of course him committing suicide is tragic, and you know, they just were involved. They were around during the ascendance of grunge, and there really was no room for them anywhere in the music scene for mainstream success. It's just a lot of bands like that kind of fell between the cracks, unfortunately. Next, we've got Mother May I, which is a band that was put out one major label record called Splitsville in 1995. They were very reminiscent of a band called The Neighborhoods, which I'm a big fan of, and I'll get into later. And kind of like a heavy, punchier, power poppy version of like The Replacements sort of thing. Songs on that record: Poison Dart, Meet You There, Birthday Wish, Teenage Jesus. Saw them a few times in Philly and in Central Jersey on that tour. Really nice guys. They let us videotape them, me and my buddy Brian. And we all liked the same bands, Cheap Trick and The Neighborhoods. In fact, we were talking about The Neighborhoods half the time when I was talking to them. And yeah, I mean, really good stuff. No hits or nothing, didn't go anywhere, but it's worth looking into. Neighborhoods, they started out as a sort of a new wave, punkish, very similar, like a trio, similar to like The Jam. Lead singer, guitarist Dave Minahan played a Rickenbacker, and kind of had the whole Paul Weller thing going on. Their songs were very short and tight and poppy but punkish at the same time, and they sort of evolved over time into a hard rock band, really power pop edged hard rock band. Brad Whitford from Aerosmith produced Hoodwinked for them, which is one of the records I'm going to mention here. Well, first, the High Hard one, which is their Enigma Records debut from 1986. Songs like WUSA, Real Stories, Arrogance, Right as Rain. Kind of like, that was like, kind of like the in-between period, and they put out a couple of other things before that. Fire. I'll put it on the screen, I can't remember the name. And then after that, they put out Hoodwinked on an independent label. I think it was Restless Records, maybe? 1990, produced by Brad Whitford. Real strong hard rock, power pop record. Hangin', Hate Zone, Roxanne, Hoodwinked. They did a cover of Cheap Trick's Southern Girls. And then they got signed to Atlantic and repackaged that record with, I think, one or two extra songs. They dropped Southern Girls. Then they did a farewell tour later that year. I guess it was in 93 or, no, 91, I guess it was. Went up to New York to see them. I videotaped it. Snuck in my camera. And then they broke up, and then they reformed a few times with Dave kind of carrying the name on ever since. But they were a really huge band in Boston. Just one of those bands that packed every club that they played. They went out on the road a lot. I think Dave was part of I think Dave Minahan might have been in Paul Westerberg's band, like Tommy Keene was. I gotta look that up, I forget. I'll put it on the screen here if I can find that. Next, Men at Work. First two records, Business as Usual from 1981 and Cargo from 1982. Just great Australian 80s rock meets power pop, sort of, new wave-ish. Not classic power pop sort of thing, but definitely like new wave with a little power pop overtone to it. Of course, Who Can It Be Now, Be Good Johnny, Down Under, Underground. Cargo had Overkill, which is great. No Sign of Yesterday, It's a Mistake, MTV videos, a lot of Dr. Heckle, Mr. Jive, High Wire, Upstairs in My House. They were all over MTV, very successful for those two records, and then they kind of fell off the planet. And Colin Hay does a lot of solo stuff, and he recently reformed Men at Work with, I don't think there's any other original members except him. And I saw him with John Waite and Rick Springfield a couple of years ago, and he was great. So yeah, the first two Men at Work records, definitely essential listening. Hall & Oates. Hall & Oates, Ecstatic from 79 was like the beginning of them sort of going in a new wave direction. Wait for Me, great single. And then they really sort of kicked it in with Voices in 1980, which had, Kiss on My List, big hit. You Make My Dreams Come True, big hit. How Does It Feel to Be Back, great song, sung by John Oates. United State, Hard to Be in Love with You. And then they followed that up with Private Eyes in 1981, which was mega huge too. Private Eyes, Did It in a Minute, Your Imagination, I Can't Go for That. And then I think H2O was after that. But really, for me, Private Eyes and Voices were like the pinnacle of like their new wave sort of power pop-ish era. Started by Ecstatic, which was like the beginning of that. Lots of great stuff in the Hall & Oates catalog, obviously. It's too long to go into here. I would start out with those two records. Of course, Rick Springfield, Working Class Dog from 1981. Jesse's Girl, I've Done Everything for You, written by Sammy Hagar. The Light of Love, Love Is All Right Tonight, Hole in My Heart, just a great record from start to finish. Got the whole Neil Giraldo stamp all over it. Tight, melodic songs. He had everything going for him in 1981. General Hospital, Good Looking Guy, hits, he was on MTV. Followed that up with Don't Talk to Strangers and Affair of the Heart. I mean, great stuff. He had some good stuff in the 70s too, but really, this is really where he really kind of hit big in the United States, and that's pretty much where everybody knows him for, is obviously Jesse's Girl. Saw him twice within the last 3 years live. He's in great shape for a guy that's in his 70s. Great shape for anybody his age, anybody's age. But for a guy that's in his 70s, it's like he must run 10 miles a day and eat carrot sticks every day. Next, Gary Newman. My favorite two records from Gary Newman would be both from 1979, Replicas, which was a Two-Way Army. That had songs like Me, I Disconnect From You, Down in the Park, a killer song. An early MTV favorite of mine, with the spinning pyramids on stage and the light show, just killer. If you've never seen it, look it up. Praying to the Aliens, Our Friends Electric, and then he followed that up with the huge Pleasure Principle, not the Janet Jackson record. He was the first, 1979, and that had Cars and Air Lane and Metal, just a real eerie, creepy, heavy sort of new way, a lot of synth with live guitar and drums, which is a great mix. Drummer Cedric, I can't remember his last name, killer drummer, just great, just really good production. Definitely a heavy Bowie sort of overtone going on a lot of his stuff. You can see Bowie's influence on him visually. But yeah, Cars was the huge song, obviously. Yeah, so I would check those out. Next, we move on to XTC. Lots of stuff in the XTC catalog. They kind of got a little bit more mellow and a little more jangle pop later on, like in the 80s. Early on, they were punkish new wave. My favorite records from them would be White Music from 78, Drums and Wires from 79, and Black Sea from 1980. English Settlement after that from 82, I think, is also really good. But these three records, you're talking about Making Plans for Nigel, Towers of London, Senses Working Overtime, Generals and Majors, killer freaking song, Respectable Street, unbelievable, Sergeant Rock, This Is Pop, Statue of Liberty, and Science Friction, all like these quirky, edgy, new wave-ish sort of songs. I think some of that stuff might have been produced by Steve Lillywhite, who, like Earl Mankey, is another guy who has really punchy new wave sort of production techniques, and all these records sound great. So yeah, XTC, check them out. And next we have a band from Canada called Sloan, another band that has a ton of records. Started out sort of as a grungy kind of thing. Sort of in that Nirvana, sort of not quite as aggressive, but alternative grunge sort of sound in the early 90s, and then they sort of evolved into more of a power pop, Beatles, Badfinger kind of thing, and very 70s sounding, dry production. A lot of it sounds like McCartney influence. My favorite records from them, there's a ton of records, so just go down a deep dive one day, go down the rabbit hole and check them all out. But I'm going to recommend Navy Blues from 1998, and also the record right after that, Between the Bridges from 1999. Songs like She Says What She Means, Underwhelmed, Iggy and Angus. Underwhelmed, I think, was on another one. Sinking Ships, Keep On Thinking, the NS, It's So Beyond Me, Don't You Believe a Word. All really good stuff. Next, Split Ends. Very huge MTV presence in 81 and 82 and 83. One of my early favorites. I got True Colors from 1980 and Waiata from 1981. I think in Australia, Waiata is called Corroborate. They're a New Zealand band, huge there. Never hit big here. I think they might have headlined some like larger clubs and small theaters probably in 80 and 81. Never like an arena act or anything like that, but they had a ton of songs on MTV and they were all great songs. I Got You, History Never Repeats, One Step Ahead, Dirty Creature, I See Red, Message to My Girl, I Hope I Never, What's the Matter with You, Give It a Whirl. Like they started I think in 77 or 78, but the two records in 80 and 81 were like the pinnacle for them as far as worldwide popularity in the United States as well. And then, of course, they split up. Neil Finn went on to have a pretty successful solo career. Tim has put out some records too, and I think they are just getting ready to reunite now for an Australian tour. New Zealand and Australia, or maybe it's just one or the other, I don't know. No word on US shows yet, but fingers crossed they'll come over here. So, moving along quickly, I'm going to go through these next handful of records because of time restrictions. I don't want the video to be crazy length. It's already probably going to be over an hour and a half. So, some other classic power pop records I would recommend would be Badfinger, for me, Straight Up, and Wish You Were Here, and the self-titled Badfinger record from 1974. A band called The Greys, which was Jason Faulkner, ex-Jellyfish member, and John Bryan, who is or was married to Amy Mann until Tuesday, I believe. Saw The Greys. They only did one tour for this record, and I think it was pretty limited. I saw them at Dobbs in Philadelphia on South Street, and amazing show. Of course, Jason Faulkner is a super talented guy. Actually, I would recommend Jason Faulkner's first two. I talked about that, I think, in the Jellyfish portion of this video. So, next, Squeeze, RG Bargy from 1980 and East Side Story from 1981 are the two main Squeeze records that I would recommend. Pulling Muscles from Shell, If I Didn't Love You, Black Coffee in Bed, like just great stuff. Joe Jackson, his debut, Look Sharp, and the follow-up, I'm the Man from '79. Quirky, punchy, aggressive, new wave, power pop. The Police, duh. Are they new wave? Maybe at the time they were considered new wave, and then they kind of morphed into pop, 80s pop. Classic rock, I don't know how they're kind of looked at, but to me they were always like a new wave edge with power pop elements, especially on the debut records, stuff like Born in the 50s and everything, and Roxanne. It had with the reggae overtones. The first 3 Police records are essential. All of them are, really. Smithereens, Especially for You from '86, debut. The follow-up, Green Thoughts from '88, and 11 from '89 that had Girl Like You, the big hit for them. But Blood and Roses, Only a Memory, all great stuff from the Smithereens. Was lucky enough to see them 2 or 3 times when they headlined on the 11 tour and the Blow Up tour after that at the Tower in Philly. Marshall Crenshaw, his debut from '82, and his follow-up, Field Day from '83. Classic power pop stuff. Someday, Some Way, Killer Song, Girls. I'm trying to think what else. Whenever You're on My Mind. Just the Vapors. Turning Japanese. Well, the debut record, Nuclear Days from 1980, and Magnets from 1981. Turning Japanese, Waiting for the Weekend, Jimmy Jones. Kind of jam-like, new wave-ish power pop with a little bit of a punk attitude. Great stuff. A band called Titanic Love Affair, Jay Bennett, and I'm trying to think who else was in that band. I know Jay Bennett was the main guy. Their debut came out in 1991 and on Charisma Records, and then they put out a follow-up called No Charisma. Must have been a little jab at their former record company. That came out in '93, and No Charisma is a little bit heavier than the debut record, but it's like very aggressive, jangly power pop. Really punchy. I know I use that word a lot, but that's the description. I think they're really both excellent records. Criminally ignored and underrated. Urge Overkill. Their big breakthrough with Saturation. Sister Havana, Positive Bleeding, great power pop songs, and the follow-up, Exit the Dragon, which was considered a disappointment, but it's got some really good stuff on it. It's a little weird. Some of it's a little laid back. So I was lucky enough to see them with Blackie at the Trocadero on the Saturation tour, which was freaking jealous. I love it. It was awesome. And the B-52's debut record from '79, obviously, Rock Lobster, Planet Claire. Just, I had got that record when it came out when I was like 9 years old, and just of that time, just a really cool, odd sort of record, and it's always been one of my favorites from that time period. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I missed a lot of stuff, I know, but I can't make a 5-hour-long video, so feel free to add in the comments and anything that you like. I know there's a lot more modern stuff that I missed, things like Fountains of Wayne and the Merrymakers and, I guess like Jelly Bricks, and there's a guy named Nick Puente. I hear him on Underground Garage a lot, Little Steven's Sirius XM channel. There's a lot of stuff that's new, kind of flies under my radar a little bit. I'll hear a song here and there, especially on Underground Garage, which is a great opportunity to hear new stuff. But yeah, feel free to put in the comments anything that you like. Put your own list, and I look forward to reading all those comments. And until next time, take it easy.